What's up, everyone? Welcome to this special Thursday afternoon edition of Manufacturing Hub. You guys may or may not, if you're watching live, you can see I've got my ignition effect hat on. I found that especially for this show under my pile of other hats. We are talking all about inductive automation and ignition and how they did it. Prove it. In just a few minutes, we will go ahead and jump back in time to day one of Prove It, where we have Travis Cox on from Inductive Automation, talking about Prove It and the conference, a little bit about what they were hoping to prove. This is now current real time in the future, and we have seen, or at least I was there for the presentation where we got to see Travis and Arlen go through and prove it. So Vlad and I've got a few minutes of commentary here. If you guys have any thoughts or questions for us on Prove It as a conference, on inductive automation, and what they and Cirrus Link did for Prove It, or anything else, please feel free to go ahead and drop those in the chat. Beyond that, we've got one or maybe two more episodes of Prove It coming out over the course of April. Again, absolutely super fantastic show. I will make note, I believe that the vast majority, if not all, of the Prove It videos from the Prove It sessions have been released. I've been seeing those getting posted over the last week or so, which is awesome. I would 100% go and check those. And Vlad said that at least some of those are on the 4.0 Solutions YouTube channel. So you guys go ahead and check those out. Before I jump into kind of my thoughts on the session, Vlad, we want to make sure that you get a chance to go talk to the people. You, a man of the people, go talk to the people. What were your overall thoughts on Prove It? What we saw with the inductive automation folks? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so look, I did not have any doubts about the team being able to showcase an interesting solution at Prove It. I think, you and I have spent many times with different individuals across the organization, so I really did not have how would I say it, a low expectations or a low bar for them. So I'm not surprised to hear that they were one of the better presentations from the conference. And so I did not have a chance to look at it yet. I know it has been published, at least for the ticket holders, and they're slowly, I believe, releasing other sessions on the open. They published, I'm looking at currently 14 videos, and we'll have a link to that as well under the session, or if you're watching in podcast form, in the description. But ultimately, yeah, I think it's super interesting to see where Ignition is going outside of the Prove It session. I know that we've done the announcements of 8.3. I think both you and I encounter Ignition in the real world in manufacturing quite frequently. I know that I've talked to many people who are looking, if they don't already have an installation of Ignition, they're looking at migrations from different OEMs and or vendors that they currently have. So I think it's not a surprise again that they've done an excellent presentation, and backed up by Arlen, of course. I think it makes a lot of sense. So that's my general thought. I think we had a good conversation with Travis. I think to maybe go back to the ICC commentary as well. There's going to be an even bigger event this year, so certainly looking forward to what they have coming next.
Absolutely, 100%. And if I can just dive into a little bit of the Prove It session with Travis and Arlen, if you guys have seen the presentation, my favorite Arlen presentation, my favorite MQTT presentation, is the first time you get on a call with Arlen, and he's like, here, let me go take this ignition gateway with 60,000 MQTT tags, and then let me go dump it onto an additional other gateway with 60,000 MQTT tags, and let me do this in like 3 seconds. And you're just there kind of awestruck. For me, I'm a bit jealous of the people who got to see it for the first time at Prove It, right? So it was super exciting, very interesting, fantastic presentation. I liked, and I feel like Travis and Arlen were probably the most successful in going through and talking about how the UNS and how MQTT is at every single layer of the solutions that they have, right? So they started at Ignition Edge, they had your normal Ignition Gateway, and they went to Ignition Cloud, and they went and they showed how they could see everything in the UNS across all of the MQTT tags on the broker. And then from that point, we did a couple of things where we changed and added UDTs. I think it was a pump. It was a pump or a valve or something that they went and towards the end visualized very quickly by building another one. I think it was at the edge, and then visualizing it in the cloud, or being able to go ahead and mirror that and see that in the cloud. Uh, Honestly, I think Travis probably is the best person that I saw who can both like furiously type in code while he's actively talking about things. My brain can't do it. We saw some people who were very good at it. Travis, absolutely very good at it. Most other people, one person was talking and the other person was furiously typing. And so I thought that was super interesting. But no, again, as Vlad said, of all of the groups at Prove It, the Inductive and Cirrus Link group was one of those with super high expectations, right? You know that they're going to do a really good job presenting this. And I feel like they did an amazing and fantastic job presenting this. Having said that, I love the conversation that we got to have with Travis. We talked a little bit about Ignition as an IIoT platform. So for the folks who were not at Prove It, Walker basically defines that there are three IIoT platforms, basically three platforms that you can, I'm just going to say can use to go kind of pull a bunch of your raw data in and visualize that. That being Ignition from Inductive Automation, Frameworks from Tatsoft, and WinCC COA from the Siemens team. All three of them were there. All three of them I felt had like fairly different presentations, which in and of themselves was very interesting. So it was fantastic to go see each of those back to back to back, and we actually have conversations from all three of those groups. I don't. I don't think it was intentional when we set it up, Vlad. I think it was, hey, these are three of the groups that we want to go talk with, and we now have three of those. So there will probably be some sort of playback or something else of those videos that live all together, so you guys can go ahead and watch that.
Yeah,
Having said again, go ahead, Vlad.
I did have a question for you, Dave, right? So when it comes to MQTT and OPC, right? So I still have a
Hmm.
lot of conversations with, I don't want to call them, legacy manufacturers, but
Hmm.
manufacturers that use certain or specific control systems
Hmm.
utilize a lot of OPC, right? And that's
Hmm.
because either the platforms don't support fully MQTT or, for other technical reasons. And so for me, the conversation is still, if we're going to look at a platform like Ignition or
Hmm.
the ones that you've mentioned, a lot of tag flow is still done over OPC, whether that's
Hmm.
maybe because of scale, maybe because it's the platforms. But for me, that's the end user reality we live in. Do you see a lot of value in the entire scalability, or I guess ease of deployment, if you will, of MQTT, or do you still work with a lot of customers that do utilize OPC over MQTT?
Yeah, so I certainly, the vast majority of groups that I work with are using OPC UA. Most of them have thankfully migrated off of OPC DA, but most of them
Right.
are thankfully using OPC UA.
Mhm.
I would honestly struggle. So in the work that I do with a lot of food and beverage, with a lot of like OEM manufacturers, with a lot of groups who have a facility and everything is in that facility, or maybe they've got 2 dozen facilities across the Americas. That is the majority of the work that I do, and for a variety of reasons, the controllers, be them Rockwell or otherwise, don't have native MQTT protocols directly from the controllers. And
Mhm.
being in the area that we are and that we live in, that basically means that there will be OPC UA, right? It may be we take something like an Opto 22 and we put it at line side and we convert the OPC UA to MQTT on the communication style, or maybe something less expensive, like a Redline Data Station Plus, if we want to go convert some of those protocols.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
there will be OPC UA. I would imagine 70-80% of the tags that I see are OPC UA. I would, yeah, I would imagine probably 70 or 80%, if not more, of the tags that I see are OPC UA. Having said that,
Yep.
I, especially in the last probably 4 or 5 years, continue to have more and more conversations around MQTT. And as I look at what I imagine, as Dave imagines the architecture of the future is going to be, I imagine it's going to be some blend of both. right? I imagine
Hmm.
that there will be OPC UA servers strong into the future, especially as we look at the European counterparts where the OPC UA foundation is so very strong. But I think for the vast majority of the applications, we will continue to see OPC UA, and then maybe we'll see MQTT for things like smart sensors, for things like we take our Opto 22s and we run a bunch of sensors back, and we've got an MQTT broker, and that's how we're communicating because we decide for a variety of reasons that's how we're going to communicate our new tags moving forward. I certainly see that as a feasibility and a possibility. And I think that the majority of the work that I've certainly heard people talk about doing only MQTT or almost exclusively MQTT is very much in the oil and gas
Yep.
region,
Yeah,
right? Where
exactly.
we've got lots of pump units. I've seen some in like water, wastewater. We've got lots of lift stations. So
Yep.
lots of locations, especially
Hmm.
lots of smaller locations that we need cellular and or radio communication in order to go send those back. There are absolutely an extremely important reasons to look at MQTT as the protocol of choice for that.
Yeah.
I imagine, and I think a lot of the conversations that we were having at Prove It was very much along the lines of what does the blend look like? And I
Hmm.
think that the majority of us have come to the conclusion that there will be a blend of OPC UA tags and MQTT tags or MQTT brokers in the field. And that's not to say that all of the OPC UA tags cannot be converted to MQTT to go be in the broker
Hmm.
that is the unified namespace. Just that, in my opinion, for many groups, that's a phase 2, 3, 5 before we go fix the structural foundation issues that they're running into today.
Yeah, and look, the reason why I asked that question is not because I think the debate around MQTT or OPC UA or DA is going to stop anytime soon. I think it's more, reflecting back at the conference because ultimately I've had a couple of conversations with end users that do not come from oil and gas, where, as you mentioned, MQTT has, I think, taken a lot of foothold. And I can certainly appreciate that you can pull out millions, if not billions or trillions of tags simultaneously. I think it is not the main pain point of the average user, right? And so what
Mhm.
I'm trying to get at is I've been thinking, what does it take to showcase a solution for an audience that attended Prove It, right? And I would almost think that a showcase of a specific protocol is not necessarily the main selling point for any platform, right? Like, not to put any of the three into that list, but
Mhm.
what truly is that selling point, right? And so I think it's maybe even a separate debate, or we can discuss that a little bit now. But when I essentially mention ignition, a lot of times it is the ease of development. It is the fact that it's modular. It is the fact that it can be not only, on a very specialized HMI, it can also be on a tablet, on a phone,
Mhm.
whatever. So it's I guess there's a thought or a conversation to be had among whomever as to how do we mass market or showcase a solution at a conference like Prove It or otherwise, and what features do we want to highlight. And if there's vendors listening to us, I think it's important to have that context, right? What are the users ultimately trying to solve, and
Mhm.
what's the most important? Because again, like I asked you, and I think it confirms my suspicion, just like myself, the first selling point is not necessarily being able to scale MQTT tags, but
Yeah.
I agree that it is very impressive, right?
Absolutely. I would say that on the vendor side, the people that did the best were people that solved actual issues and also had really good visuals. So we've talked about
Mhm.
Tulip and we've talked about how Mark and Eric did a fantastic job. They did it because they solved an issue and they had great visuals and they had this is how we can go about doing it. Right. And I feel like Arlen and Travis also had a series of great visuals and they showcased some amazing technology. Again, exactly what you'd expect from those guys. And then there are some other folks who I didn't watch live, but like Remus Pop. who I think Vlad's going to get on at some point later, and they're going to go into super in depth the solution that Remus and Snowflake built. But right, they built a chatbot, right? And so they built a chatbot, and that is tangible, right? So I think people want tangible. When I go and build demonstration solutions, I want to go through the process of building the thing that is tangible. And if the end user can see that solving a problem, they're much more likely to go say yes than if you were to, I don't know, write a work procedure for ice fishing, right? I mean, if you're working with someone and if your end user is someone who loves ice fishing and you get the procedures right, absolutely going to connect with them. I just imagine that it's not going to connect with the vast majority of groups that they have out there. So, from my opinion, I think the vast majority, if not everyone at Prove It, solved a technical problem and did a good job solving that technical problem. I think the best ones did it with a compelling story and very good visuals.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. I think we can probably get into the conversation we've had with Travis back at Prove It, unless you have any other comments.
No, absolutely. Everyone in the chat, it was great seeing you guys. If you have questions for Vlad or I or Travis during the conversations, please go ahead and let us know. At this point, I am going to fast forward us or maybe rewind us back to day one of Prove It, where I will go reintroduce the conversation with Travis. If you guys have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to drop them below. If not, we'll see everyone live 4 o'clock East Coast time next Wednesday for Manufacturing Hub.
Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. We are back here at Prove It, day one, talking with Travis from Inductive Automation. Travis, I don't know how our listeners would manage to have watched 200 episodes without hearing you or one of the other many inductive folks that we've had on over the years. But if someone is watching Prove It content and doesn't know Inductive Automation, can you tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about the company, and what you're here to solve, please?
Absolutely. Thank you for that introduction, and thanks for having me here as well. So I'm Travis Cox. I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist for Inductive Automation, and I've been with the company for over 20 years, and throughout my entire career, it's always been focused on helping customers build their plant floor solutions and to talk about the art of the possible and to take advantage of what's there and to solve more pain points and challenges and to do more. And that's really what Inductive Automation is all about. We're an integration company, and it's as a software company to solve those pain points. And so that's we create Ignition, our software product that does that. And I'm super happy to be here at Prove It to showcase what Ignition does in the digital infrastructure.
And I guess in the context of Prove It, right, you were given a certain data set of a real factory that was collected over a period of time. Maybe can you talk to us a little bit more? What kind of a challenge did you find to solve? How did you tackle it? And ultimately, what was the benefit for the end user?
So honestly, I didn't find it to be challenging at all. We can go there because ultimately they provide the infrastructure, which is really important because often when you talk to a customer or you're going into a new system, they don't have the infrastructure. And so you're helping them through, what does that look like? What should we have? And here, it started with that. This is what we want. This is our digital strategy. How do you fit into this strategy? What benefits do you provide us in the strategy? And I think it's pretty refreshing. So they provided OPC UA server, they provided MQTT broker, and they provided a SQL database, all three of which are native things that Ignition has worked with for many years.
Could you maybe elaborate on that comment, right? Not having the right infrastructure, maybe what does it take for your solution to shine, or maybe what are some of the early steps for someone who does not have the infrastructure that we're seeing?
Yeah, when we looked at building a SCADA system or MES system, it's how people approach it has always been the same. It's like, I'm going to go build a SCADA system. So those domain experts figure out, okay, here's the data we're going to connect to. We're going to bring it in. We're going to build that. We're going to accomplish those goals. We then go on to another system that says MES, and they have a different team. They go do the same stuff. And ultimately, the real mindset shift is this data is important to the business. So let's make sure that we're focusing on what does the data mean to us? And the data comes from the SCADA and MES. Likely they're going to need data from each other. But ultimately, the data from both of those are going to be super insightful for the business to solve additional challenges later on. And so it's that infrastructure of basically say, look, okay, I want to build a SCADA system, but I also want to make sure that data is available to me. Same thing for an MES. And so that common infrastructure the UNS approach is it's really that mindset change, because if I can get it into a common infrastructure, now I can unlock the power of that data.
Yep.
And you don't have to do a lot to build the infrastructure. You can start really small, but it's a kind of idea of let's decouple our data from the applications, from who needs to get that data, and make it leverage open standards so that now people who need it have the means to do that.
Absolutely. Let me ask, talking about UNS and the Prove It conference here, when new customers are coming and talking to you, Travis, are they talking to you and discovering UNS? Are they committed to the idea of a UNS and then looking at Ignition as one of their solutions? How does that typically work for you guys in the Ignition ecosystem?
We certainly see all the above, but more and more people and companies are getting educated on what UNS is.
Yes.
And we all know it's not a product. It's a strategy. It's a concept. It's something that they have to understand and figure out how to deploy for themselves. And so some are coming to us, say, hey, we understand UNS. What does that mean to you? How do you fit into it? And that's where we can go in the art of the possible, kind of showcase what, for example, MQTT and SparkPlug has to offer in that. There's a lot of customers, of course, that don't really have any idea what this is. But they know, especially when CIOs are getting involved, they know they want to get more insights, right? And to do more data. And so that's where I think that's important to kind of get the education out there as to, we can't just build these systems the way we've been building it for 25 years. We've got to think about it differently and ultimately get OT and IT working together to accomplish that. But we're getting people from all different sides. But what's great to see is more and more people are understanding, or at least thinking about UNS. And that's an important thing. It's that shift away from proprietary into open frameworks. And pretty soon companies are going to be like, look, we're not going to use products that don't fit into our infrastructure or how we want to do things. And that's a big change, right, for our industry.
I want to ask you a question again around maybe the challenges of having that many vendors building on top of that UNS simultaneously. And obviously without naming any names, but again, I think we've all seen an integration, I'm going to say projects, there's going to be multiple hands in the proverbial jar, and so you run into issues maybe. And so I'm curious, and even outside of Prove It, maybe what kind of challenges you have seen on that side. And I think the UNS solves that extremely well, but I would still say there probably are some challenges. So if you can elaborate on some of those indeed.
Yeah, first of all, you've got to establish what you want that naming convention to, and that standard to be, because if you just let it be the Wild West, there will be tons of collisions, tons of problems. Data won't necessarily have the right context or mean what you want it to mean. Right. So
who would do that? Look, sorry to interrupt. Who is that? An integrator? Is that the end user?
Ideally, it's the end user who's defining what they want their hierarchy and their namespace to be, because they're going to have process data in there. They're going to have MES data there. They're going to have analytic data in there. They're going to have potential ERP data in there, and like maintenance management. All this information can get put into this common infrastructure, this namespace. But in order for them to, if I were to connect into it, in order for them to make sense, they have to be able to understand it.
Yes.
So they need to define that. And honestly, right now, we're using the ISA 95 standard, right, for that, in terms of, that's what you're seeing here. The enterprise, the site, the areas, the lines, the cells, organizing that way. And then even within that, breaking into what's process data, what's MES data, what's the operator-related data, all of that. You break in those different folders. And if you got to start somewhere.
Yes.
So that's a great place for people to at least start the conversations.
Absolutely. And if I can add to Travis's comment, I think that the only way to be successful in contextualizing and building those strategies are at the corporate level, and it's as early as possible.
Yeah.
I think that once you have lines built or lines in process of being built without those requirements, without those kind of very base company standards, you now assume a huge amount of tech debt. And not only do you have to go through as an organization of building those standards, but then you have to go back through the process of fixing those hopefully only thousands or tens of thousands of tags that are not created to those standards. And I have seen different prime builders and things like that have a standard, and that standard is good for them. But as soon as you start adding outside vendors, and as soon as you start going and building systems on top of all of that, by the time some of us come in, it's just a jumble of, I can see that we just built this, but it feels like we've got a decade worth of tech debt just on the naming conventions, just on the tag side and the structure side, and it's going to be months worth of work in order to go set that right after we've built an agreed upon standard.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think UNS hits upon the true OT-IT convergence.
Yes.
Because obviously there's a lot of data in OT. We want to make use of it in the business side, but you can't just approach it from, listen, if we have one site starting, there's one small use case that if we approach it as an independent thing and we don't think about anything else, then it may not scale.
Absolutely. It almost never scales. In my experience, it almost never scales. If you go build a one-off, almost no one thinks about, okay, what happens if we build it from one line to the rest of the facilities, or God forbid, this one line to 20 facilities in the region.
Yeah, you need to have that common philosophy and framework across all of your entire organization. I think the biggest thing, though, is leadership does have to set the tone.
Yes.
That in order for us to digitally transform, this has to be part of our DNA.
Yes.
Everybody is going to contribute to this. And so, because everybody is aware, from operators all the way up to C-level, if everybody understands that this is going to help drive business decisions, going to help drive our objectives, and that we should all take it seriously, and so that we get more collaboration, that's where you're going to start winning.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Because that's the part that I think a lot of companies are neglecting.
Yes.
It's like, we have people that are smart here. We're going to build this infrastructure where this one site becomes this model citizen, but then we can't take it anywhere else because we don't have the leadership that's driving it.
Absolutely. And if I may, one more time, Vlad, he's chomping at the bit, Travis. I would 100% agree. I think that we're in an interesting time in manufacturing because we are now to the point of having tools and technologies and softwares and a relatively small number of people, but tools, times, and technologies that will allow us to build and scale a solution. I feel like every so often you go and you talk to a medium to large organization and they're like, I have 5 sites. All 5 of my sites did this completely different. We've got 2 off-the-shelf solutions. We've got 2 sites that are pen and paper, and we've got this one bespoke solution. And we've got 5 full-time developers trying to bubblegum it together, and they love their bespoke solution, but it will not scale, and absolutely none of them will scale. So we're at a really interesting time where that is becoming possible for groups smaller than Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies.
And that's honestly the part that those are the companies that we really want to provide solutions to.
Absolutely.
Small and medium size, because they're not going to have the resources or potentially the budget, right, to be able to do this. But the technology is so accessible. There's so much of it. And we're seeing it all here at Prove It. And it's all converging.
If I could do a follow-up on both of this stuff.
Sure.
I think that to some extent, people understand the value of a critical SCADA system, right? So when you go to sell a SCADA, I think there's no question in most customers' minds that you need something that's robust, that's going to provide value for the plant floor. I think on the data side, we're still seeing, as you mentioned, there's maybe a need for a catalyst or a push for them to see the value, whether it's for something as simple as an employee metric or something a bit more advanced like troubleshooting. So I guess my question for you, Travis, would be, what are you seeing with customers that ignites that spark that, yes, like we actually get this and they're going to change what they've been doing in the past and are looking to adopt more data solutions versus, again, maybe some traditional SCADA and things?
Yeah, no, I think it's identifying an actual use case. If we're going to start small, you can't eat the whole elephant. You got to start small. If we can identify a use case, and honestly, it's been said here already, but that's the energy's use case. We want to be energy reduction, become more green, or at least want to understand what our energy profiles look. Maybe it's on one asset that we start with. And you start there, you get the data where it needs to go, so you can start getting some insights off of that and get a win. If you can get the win, that will be a catalyst for future projects to take off. So what's important is that you not only have to identify the use case, but you then have to, even if it's a small one, you got to lay the right foundation architecture to accomplish that, because then the next use case comes in, it should be very easy to just implement that. Because you have the infrastructure in place. So I think those two are incredibly important.
Is the challenge usually on the technical side or on the people and change management side?
100% on the people and change management side. Like, the technology there's so much out there. And what I found really interesting is more and more IT departments want to get involved. Historically, there's been that, if you will, that rift between OT and IT, but there's a recognition that, like, hey, we have a lot of knowledge. We know how to build infrastructures. We know, like, especially now with containerization and Kubernetes and all this, this are great, and we want to be able to bring that in and fully take advantage of it. 100%. So the technology is amazing, but it's hard to change people's mindsets.
I agree. I always say, and almost all of our guests disagree with me, Travis, is that IT, in my best, most successful projects, IT are core partners. if they're not core partners, you run into this IT/OT convergence, you run into groups hating each other, you run into shadow IT. On the best, most successful projects, IT is at the table at the very beginning, or sometimes they're the ones driving this.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So maybe your first one on here is to agree complete with that. I think the most successful companies are the ones that have taken the OT professionals and the IT professionals and created it into one team.
Okay.
Right, where they're both say, look, we have our domain knowledge, you have your domain knowledge. Together, we're going to accomplish some of these goals that the company has. Let's work on these things together. It shouldn't be that like if you will, if I'm having a meeting, that it's OT by themselves and no IT in there, or vice versa, IT in there with no OT, because that's where the problems come. This OT people's ITs do making decisions without me, and we have to run a line. Our line has to keep running. And vice versa, like IT people is like, why don't want you making decisions for us or using shadow IT or using tools that we don't support? So if they are making those decisions together, I think they're going to have a lot more success.
What group would that be under?
Gosh, I don't know. What would we call that?
That's the question. I have seen some groups who have IT folks on their OT side, mostly on the operations side under the COO.
Yeah.
I have seen a shocking number of groups. Honestly, one would be shocking, but a shocking number of groups that have the SCADA, MES, and development teams under IT, because when they structured the first time, it was software's under IT.
Yeah.
I don't know what that unified group would be, but I 100% agree. You need to be able to have the conversations with the people buying and speccing the servers and the network architecture across the entirety of the organization.
And if I may, I'll add one more thing, which I think is really important. It's that on the IT side, especially the CIOs coming in, recognize that they want to set a name, right? And they want to solve some major problems, but if they don't understand the manufacturing environment, if they're not making the effort to go and to live in the day of the life of an operator or people on the plant floor, then it's going to be really hard for these sides to come together. And ultimately, I 100% believe that in order for a company to be successful, that you have to look from the ground up. Those operations folks and people running it are so critical in all these decisions that you need to understand their challenges, you solve their challenges, but do it in a way so that it unlocks the potentials that we can get in IT. And it can't just be like, oh, I'm going to go to a Magic Quadrant and just pick a solution just because it's in a particular area and say, we're going to use that. You've really got to look at it holistically.
Where have you seen the most, continuing again like conversation IT and OT, champions that would push these solutions? To me, it's always or usually a person that really understands the process at a deep level that can drive something home again, like maybe the first proof of concept. But ultimately, have you seen maybe IT folks be more excited on the software side and see the data when we have those conversations?
Yeah, you definitely get champions from either end. First of all, you have to get a champion. You got to get somebody who's going to be able to drive that and can understand the value and the ROI you're going to get out of these. But I've seen it from IT because ultimately they understand the data science world. They understand how to get insights into data, and they want access to it and to help. But I think more often though, it comes from the plant floor. If there's champions there that really fundamentally understand, they may not have all the answers. They don't have to technically understand all the pieces, but if they can drive that and connect the right people, then they know what they're going to get from an operations standpoint. The efficiencies they'll gain on that. Because heck, it's been said for a lot of projects, if you can gain just 2% that efficiency, what's that mean in terms of your revenue and all that?
I want to talk about that a little bit. Vlad made a really good point, I think, yesterday when we were talking with some groups about how some groups are going to talk about small to medium-sized manufacturers, but some groups, especially some groups here, are super enterprise manufacturers, right? And when we talk about OEE, you love to show the figures of, hey, we found a 30% or a 50% additional OEE. And for some groups, that is reasonable and possible. But for all of the major enterprises out there, Vlad's like, in some of his past lives, like 0.2% is $1 billion of revenue.
Yeah.
So how do you, from the software side, from the ignition side, go figure out, are you talking to mostly the small to medium groups? Does that messaging change when you talk to enterprise where 0.1% is $1 billion? What does that look like? How do you go make those decisions to the different groups and how you go send that message out?
Yeah, that's interesting, the way you bring that, because when you're talking as the small ones, they don't have any data at all. Everything's manual, and often there's no HMI. It might be the only thing they have on the floor. So there's so much opportunity for digital transformation with the small, once they're aware of the technologies that they could bring in. But the medium ones, I think there's a large focus on OE in the medium.
Yeah.
And that's because it's now approachable. Okay, we do have sensors, we've got data, and we understand our process, but we could do better, right?
Yes.
There's ways that we could do better just with what we already have. We don't have to introduce new lines and new machines. We could just do it there. And OE is still so critical as a solution. I don't hear it as much with the large one because they've walked the walk with a lot of it, even though it's still incredibly important.
Yep.
But I think what it does is the conversation has shifted to how do we leverage AI or ML to eke out more efficiency, which is really just OE in a different way. I was saying in my head, like, we asked that
You
question.
said the quiet part out loud, Travis.
Sorry?
You said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you maybe a more forward-looking question, right? So
Sure.
I think that we're seeing a lot of different partners and different solutions here at Prove It, right? What are you maybe excited about as complementary technologies to Ignition? Are you excited to see more advanced like PLCs, more advanced brokers, more advanced historians, like more advanced messaging? You know what I mean? Like, what are you looking at and saying, oh, wait, that's an interesting advancement that will allow us maybe to leverage this better for the end user?
I think there's two sides of the coin there. Three. I'll mention three. So one is, look, if we don't have to connect to a PLC to get data, it just comes into Ignition, I'm happy with that.
Yep.
And honestly, that's the way it needs to be. The big focus is building applications, building a SCADA system, building an alarming system, building an MES system. You want to be able to do that, and access to data shouldn't be difficult.
Yep. But if the PLC is better, would you say it's easier to access the data, or it's still
Okay, it depends on how you've approached it, but it should, if that's a single source of truth for the data, and the data is already contextualized there, then that makes our job really easy. If it's not, then we have to do that additional work, right? We've got to add that context. So I think that's one area where it will change dramatically. Look at a greenfield situation, it's going to what you deploy there's amazing stuff, right? It's going to completely be different. I also look at it from a storage point of the storing data. We would traditionally store that in historians on premise or SQL databases or whatever. And those tools, while that's important for like local trends and that, but I'm more excited for storing that data with context in these data warehouses that are set up for sharing data, set up for easier access to analytics off that data, because you can run those and get results right back into the system, right?
Absolutely.
But I got to say, what I'm really excited about would be a chatbot for an operator. It's pretty exciting, right? To imagine I'm operator, I just say, hey, natural language, what's going on with line 3? And it takes all the information that's been collected, all the drawings of the machines and the documentations and their past experiences, and it can give them a really good responses to, hey, we're having these issues, maybe we should try this or this.
Absolutely.
That's going to be an incredible day.
I agree. I have always been on the operator or operations level will give us the most forward immediate value, because most people who don't think that have never paged through a 1,000-page maintenance manual to find a particular answer, and then there's like a grease smudge over it or an oil drip over the thing that you need to read. Travis, this has been amazing. I want to go and mention to all of our listeners at home, mostly the fact that I think like half of the groups here are using Ignition. No, like not just in the infrastructure, not how as built like virtual factory. I was paging through, and you may or may not have also seen it, Travis, it's what piece of technology are you using, what other pieces of technology are you using. And I'm like, I think almost all of these groups or half the groups are using Ignition, which I think is just a testament to the cornerstone that is to the industry and especially to the providers here. But I do want to ask you one last question, Travis. If the viewers at home are looking to take away one thing from you, from Ignition, from Prove It, what is the one thing you want them to think about and remember?
That's a really good question. At the end of the day, we really believe in the ecosystem and community. And we have an amazing product for the plant floor.
Yep.
And that's where we want to revolutionize the plant floor. We can do that. Then there's so much more that gets unlocked. And honestly, there's this thing could handpick technology, right? That you could just play with and use. That's our focus, is to really deliver the most and to continue to solve additional pain points and make it easy for people to build these kind of systems at the end of the day. But it won't happen without open standards. It won't happen without community in terms of being able to choose best in class.
Absolutely. I love that, Travis. Thank you so much, as always, for hanging out with us. Everyone, thank you for watching this. I hope you're enjoying this and our continued Prove It coverage. Please stick around. Go check the chat and the show notes. We'll have all of the information that we talked about with Ignition and the other services. Mostly that's 100% on Vlad, so thank you for continuing to do that, Vlad. You make our show notes amazing. Be sure to catch us normal times, Wednesdays, 4 o'clock East Coast time on Manufacturing Hub with Vlad and I and our normal guests, and continue